To face for the Newsfirst team, I'm Niresh Elyatambi. With me this evening is Dr. Harinda Vidanage, who is the director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the Kotalavala Defense University. That's the KDU. We're going to talk about the need for strategic assessment into the future, where any country is concerned, but particularly a country like Sri Lanka. Because too often, countries like ours are caught flat-footed when a crisis erupts, such as the one in the Middle East, or COVID, or El Nino, or some such disaster. We are getting better at it, but a wiser counsel needs to be followed so that we are not caught unawares. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Harinda.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Right. So, Dr. Harinda, we seem to be getting a handle on catering to some types of challenges, but other types of challenges we are all at sea. So, for example, I think the weather event which occurred in the last couple of days, there were unfortunately some fatalities, but that's certainly, not the fault of a government per se, perhaps the local government authorities and perhaps individuals. But I think we managed the implications quite well. And then we have other challenges such as dengue, which again, you can't fault the government per se. It is up to each one of us. And there have been tens of thousands of prosecutions, but still Sri Lankans don't seem to get the message. But when it comes to global situations, whether it is the eruption of a conflict or the advancement of technology, are we prepared? Are we properly assessing what is going on in the world around us?
I think it's a good question. I mean, it's a good conversation to have, because one of the things missing in our society, as well as the way we generate knowledge and also how we analyze situations, there is a fundamental lack. That lack comes from what we as a strategic community see as the poverty of strategic analysis as well as strategic culture, right? So it is something that can be ingrained society-wide through the education ecosystem, through advanced institutions that are built into government establishments. It can happen at various levels. If you look at, say we have been talking about the Middle East crisis for some time now, but what we always have are abstract analysis, abstract understandings. But if you stop for a minute and look at that crisis and think what exactly is happening, what is the actual, what is the big picture there? It is not just the fact that there is a particular crisis in a region. It is a crisis that is symptomatic of a larger problem in the current global order. So when I say global order, that may sound a bit too technical, but basically how the world hangs together and how that world functions, that particular framework is the one that is in crisis. So that particular crisis is manifesting as forms of conflict, political instability. So look at South Asia last 4-5 years. We have had significant political uprisings, political transitions, and it seems most of the time, most of these crises, we have not been prepared, or number two, we have no kind of capability to cope with that. That is basically, when we talk about strategy, strategy is not just planning or strategizing, it is also preparation, it is resilience, it is institutions. So we kind of seem to have mismanaged that approach, and we are kind of being affected because of that. So you brought out examples like serious weather events, financial crises, law enforcement issues, domestic crime. So if you look at them separate, we treat them in separate baskets, separate categories. But if you look at it from a strategic framework, these are all national security challenges of the 21st century.
Now, Dr. Harinda, let me ask you about the institutions which countries generally rely on. Now, when you take countries like the United States or in Europe, universities are very much in the forefront, and they are respected by the policymakers. So the papers and presentations are widely read and taken very seriously. But do we do this in Sri Lanka? Because I know we have many such institutions, including your own center at KDU. And of course, we have the other universities, we have a lot of think tanks. But is government in the habit of reading these assessments, of going through it? Who is doing it? Because we can't expect the ministers and deputy ministers to do it. They simply don't have the time. But who is actually reading these very valuable insights, these papers and reports? Or is it just that they are gathering dust?
Let me address this. It's a very important question. You know, it's a question. I mean, see, I am in no sense saying that we have it's not about a critique about our education system, but I think the problem is in the evolution, right? So as you corrected, rightly pointed out, in globally, not just in the West. Now, if you take some Chinese universities, if you look at the rankings now, they have proceeded, way above their peers and rivals, whatever competitors. One of the things most universities globally have adjusted is to move from pure academic analysis, especially when it comes to policy space-based research, into more applied analysis. So, and also universities are in the habit of nurturing and developing think tanks in their own system. So even like the think tank I represent is a new iteration. So this is a new effort even from the KDU to create this kind of a culture. So the challenge is not, it's a systemic challenge. Why I say it's a systemic challenge is that policymakers are supposed to make informed decisions, right? So universities or think tanks, their role is to provide that information, right? In tangible, in applied ways to make sense, to be used for policy consumption in the process of policy making. So this is where we have the kind of disconnection. One is that what I said earlier about the lack of strategic culture. Strategic culture is a training, you acquire a sense that you need to approach things strategically. You need to do assessment. You need to make the connection. You may also need to run simulations. You may also need to get the counsel of diverse experts, stakeholders, and then proceed to the initial policy making. So it is not a government's issue. It has been a problem in our political culture. It's a systemic issue where we have not encouraged that kind of connectivity. So that is why, contrary to what you said, yes, I agree there are think tanks, but comparatively Sri Lanka's think tank space is very small, right? If you compare it with even other countries, like take Singapore, for example, Singapore's has what you call a future foresight think tank embedded into the Prime Minister's office. If you just go to the, even the viewers can even just Google, even if you, when I'm just saying Center for Critical Future Studies, it is there. The whole role of that center is to provide analysis, research analysis into potential future developments, future challenges, and inform the Prime Minister about decisions and the measures he or she has to take. So that is where we are lagging. So if a crisis like the Middle East strike, if there and these days we say the crises are not singular, one level, one tiered, they are multi-tiered. We call them polycrises because they are built upon one. So for example, a war can be built upon a climate crisis. It can be built upon a political crisis. So if you are these are the 21st century crises that people are, it's very challenging to be a policymaker in this century. It's not, it is, the complexity has vastly increased. So that is why you need this kind of input. That is why think tanks have emerged in societies, in countries, to provide that insight. That is what we are lacking. So if you even take Canada has, Canadian Prime Minister's Office or government has something called a Horizons analysis. So that is purely a foresight establishment within the Canadian government. In the British government, there is something called UK Foresight, which is established in the Science Ministry, the Ministry of Science, but they provide the insight to policymakers about futuristic trends. So countries are actively thinking strategically. When I say thinking strategically, I also need to qualify this term. Strategy is, in simple terms, is what we call ways, means and ends, but in a national sense, strategy means how countries, shape their approaches, policies, understanding the limited resources anybody has, and to use the best means possible to use that limited resources to gain maximum advantage for your national interests. So that is why countries would have a foreign policy. That is why countries would adopt a national a robust economic policy, investment policy. And that is why most countries in this century, and especially in this day and age, has integrated all of that into a larger national security apparatus. When I say national security in Sri Lanka, that is a very narrowly understood phenomena. It is a broad thing where you create a national security architecture which is, codependent upon all other sectors and provides ultimate guidance. So everybody knows. For example, if a climatic crisis, if a weather or a weather-induced crisis comes, if it's within a national security framing, you know which agencies to respond, which agencies to take over, which have they run simulations before, have they done modalities of what kind of extreme weather events can happen, have they have pre-preparedness. That will always help. We will not know what kind of a exact crisis that is coming, but when a weather-induced crisis comes, there is a preparation. Because that is taken as a national security priority. So these are the ways countries have adapted into responding to minimize damage, to safeguard their citizenry, as well as create what we call prosperous societies. So that is something. It is not just about changing of government, changing of leadership. It is a holistic cultural shift that we have to understand that the world is going through, and we need that shift ever more than ever before, because the world is complicated. You have, as you said, we have a techno revolution, right? We have, couple of years ago we had AI. Last year probably we had what we call large language module, like such as ChatGPT. Now we are moving into what we call agentic AI. So policymakers, policy managers. So when I say policy managers, ministries. Right? In Sri Lanka, people still don't know what the role is. If you take foreign ministry, it manages the policy of the government. So they all have to be in sync with these transitions. For all of that to happen, the education, the strategic culture has to be there.
Now, Dr. Harinda, you mentioned certain institutions in the UK, Singapore and Canada, and of course in other countries, as examples. these are permanent institutions.
Yes, yes.
So very clearly those countries have recognized that they need these forward-thinking institutions whose job, the experts in those institutions, their job is to think of the future and to protect their country from those challenges as best they can. Now, in Sri Lanka, we have a more reactive approach. When something happens in the world, we tend to have a interdisciplinary committee. It will include perhaps 10 to 15 people from various departments and ministries. If it has to do with health, it will, you will have health and foreign affairs and AG's department and all that. But my point is that these people who are put on such a committee have their regular jobs. If you put the Secretary of the Ministry of Defense or the Secretary of the Ministry of Health onto such a committee, they have their other work to do. This is an additional thing. So, is it that culture which needs to change?
I think so. I think we need, the whole idea of strategic thought, strategic assessment, and institutions to back that up is to certainly have a community of strategies, community of linked expert groups working full time. So that is one of the challenges Sri Lanka has faced, even within ministry systems. Take defense ministry for example. I think we need more what we call permanent defense civilians, right? So we have a lot of good civil servants doing their best. Contrary to many people who kind of blame, I have seen firsthand. I work with I work with these people. They are very good professionals. They are highly committed. But the problem is that systemically, you be in the defense ministry for a couple of years, then you go, right? So the continuity, there are issues there. So there are critical ministries that needs to be manned by bureaucrats as well as subject and functional experts, so that you have the capacity to deal with things. So, for example, a ministry like defense, a ministry like finance, a ministry like education, even agriculture needs their internal established research strategic bodies. They need a strategic SAR. Every ministry needs a strategic SAR. So most countries are now having strategic leads, not just in ministries, but even in the corporate sector. Now, even in the corporate sector, they are calling for strategic analysts who can make sense of what's happening in the world. And sometimes there is a lot of linkages between the corporates and the private and the public sector. So that is all a kind of a social political engineering that Sri Lanka needs to adopt very fast. This is not wishful thinking. I'm not thinking, if somebody is thinking this is all wishful. No, this is not wishful. If Sri Lanka, if we are looking forward to look even at the next 25 to 40 years, where we are heading, this current architecture won't do. We really need to advance it, they build upon. I think I have seen there are good efforts. You see the Ministry of Digitalization under the President, they are trying to do a lot of digitalization as well as, improve digital services, digitization plus digitalization and all these things. So that can't happen in one ministry. That is a cultural shift which has to happen overall. So otherwise we would not face cybersecurity breaches. See, this is an example. Now, if you listen to the cybersecurity conversation in Sri Lanka and the recent, we had couple of cyber breaches in the state system, very bad ones. We try to point fingers and try to, but the problem is how many Sri Lankans understand cyber hygiene, right? Cyber hygiene is, is something very similar to our normal hygiene. So, see, one of the primary things about cybersecurity fundamentals that we don't discuss much, because Sri Lanka, because in the context of cybersecurity, you have mostly technical experts, but policy experts is a bit less. cyber security, from beginning of the cybersecurity discourse, the most pragmatic approach was the health security approach. You treat it like a public health safety issue, right? Why? For example, like, simple things. If you want to get rid, keep yourself more hygiene, you wash your hands. You have a hygiene practice that keeps you healthy and safe and healthy. So you can't be in the context of cyber also, the strategic culture should start with hygiene. How many people in the public sector, or even how many people tend to use, if you ask for an email address, they will give you a personal address first. They will give you a, like a Gmail or a Yahoo, whatever. But that culture has to change. That is a cyber hygiene shift. That has to come from a cultural change. So one of the biggest vulnerabilities in cyberspace is not tech. Tech is part of the story. Most of the vulnerabilities come from social engineering. That is why the first virus that went viral in cyber, in the cyber world was "I love you" virus. See, both of us are middle-aged men. What's the bet? Most of our men in our category, if we get an email 10 years back saying "I love you," we are very curious to know who has sent it. We'll click it. So that is social engineering, right? So that is, the criminal has found a way to our pocket through our heart. So these are, I'm giving you a very simple example so that our audience can understand, but it is more of a strategic thought. So just because we have the most advanced technology won't save us.
So it's a cultural shift.
It's a culture. So we need to understand what we call techno-cultural shifts, strategic cultural shifts that's changing the times. So without understanding that and applying that institutionally, just because we can buy or get stuff, we are not going to go for. That's what I'm saying. For that, you need strategic thought.
Absolutely. And for decades, Sri Lanka didn't move forward in these areas, in strategic thought, in bringing in changes to the way that we operate, that our institutions operate, the processes. We were stuck in the past in a big way.
I would say not stuck. I think Sri Lanka has always, we have managed to maneuver, cut corners, and
we stumble and bumble along.
So for a long time that kept us okay. That kept us. We took some hits, but so I think for a long time since the independence, we have held ourselves hostage to fortune. But in the world that is coming upon us now, with this crisis, with these major transitions, more advanced societies, more advanced companies. So now, for example, an AI company like Anthropic is more sophisticated than most states. Their thinking, their capabilities are more advanced than an average nation state. So you are dealing with that kind of challenges. So the funny term in strategic is, we call it strategic ambiguity. We remain ambiguous. Then we think we are okay. Or we remain what we call strategically silent. That is how our foreign policy had been, ambiguous and silent. So for a long time that had worked for us. But no, not anymore. So how are we going to then, so I think that has, so we have remained dormant by choice, but now we have to quickly evolve out of necessity. That's the challenge we are facing. So how fast can we evolve? Because it's now out of necessity. So we remained dormant and was okay, but not anymore.
Absolutely. Some very good points indeed. I am in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage. We need to take a short commercial break right now. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This weekend and every weekend, TV One brings you the adrenaline of Aussie rules football. for the very first time on Sri Lankan free-to-air television. Feel the hits, the spectacular marks, and the roar of the crowd. Every weekend, catch AFL action exclusively on TV1 every Sunday at 9:45 p.m. Don't miss a moment, because every mark, every goal, every victory is right here. TV1, the home of AFL for millions of Sri Lankans. Brought to you in partnership with ABC Australia.
මං පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට ඔයාලඟට එනවා ආර්යමන්. මං ඒක පොරොන්දු වෙනවා. මේක කොහොමදත් සිද්ධ වෙන්න දෙන්න බෑ. ඔයා හිතාගෙන ඉන්නේ මං අහන කියලාද?
ඒක තමයි ඩැඩ් වැදගත්ම දේවල් ලියනකොට කාටවත් මේව හොයාගන්න බැරි වෙන විදිහට ලිව්වේ. ඉන්විසිබල් ලින්ක් එකක.
ඇත්ත කියන එක තමුන්ගේ ඇඟට ගුණයි. කියනවා. අහන කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම කවුද කියනවා.
අද රාත්‍රී 9:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන් සරු පොළොවෙන් ඉසුරු මවමු. දිට්වා වෙනසූ කෘෂි යටිතල පහසුකම් යළි ගොඩනැංවීමේ මහා සංග්‍රාමය. මාතලේ මහනුවර නුවර එළිය සහ බදුල්ල දිස්ත්‍රික්ක 4 පුරා ගොවි ජන සංවර්ධන දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව සමගින් ගම්මැද්ද තවත් යෝධ පියවරක් තැබූ වගයි. ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන ජනපෞර.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage. Dr. Harinda, now let's talk about the role of communications, transportation, and technology in the rapidity of these polycrises, as the term goes, which is multiple crises at the same time. Now, for example, in the past, let's say 30, 40 years ago, or even further, if you had a disease outbreak, an epidemic in the middle of Africa, we didn't care because it wasn't coming here, because people didn't travel very much. The flights were few and far between. But today, you have Ebola in the Congo. It can be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because of the rapidity of air transport. And the same goes for technology. Now, with the rapidity of technology and the way that technology moves around the world, a virus is, as soon as it's uploaded, it's worldwide. So that means that our reaction times have to be very, very fast.
Yeah, I think, so the problem with, so there's this interesting saying that somebody talk about cybersecurity, some argue that cybersecurity is dead because there is no way you can have a 100% safe cyber environment. So the idea then is to take a bit of a old school approach. There's something called this information triad, which is how do you protect information. So information, how do you protect your systems and vulnerability. First vulnerability is the intrusion. Someone can intrude. Second vulnerability is extortion. Somebody can take. The third vulnerability is the kind of what we would call alteration. So which is a more dangerous one. So rather than intrude, extort, what if somebody can change? So the strategic and the more policy pragmatic approach is what we call building resilient systems. That has been a mantra, but it has to be brought into application. So one of the challenges again for us is that how do you build digitally resilient societies? especially at a time when, for example, the government is doing its level best to accelerate digitization and digitalization. So digitalization works if more information, most of our data are digitized. Only that when it is digitized, it can be transformed into a digital ecosystem. So then digitalization can take place. But then parallel to that, so that is both of these things can have vulnerabilities. Then how do you then create safety? But more than the safety, it's the resilience, systemic resilience. So the challenge for the government as well as other implementing institutions, including corporate sector, is to manage both these parallelly. So we need digitization. We need to digitize to digitalize. Then we same time we need to evolve resilience, because more you digitize data and digitalize processes, they're significantly vulnerable, right? Because then they are basically data, bits and bytes. They are transferred on cables. They are transferred on networks. So that then the technological vulnerability comes as well as the human vulnerability. So are we approaching it in that way? That's the question. I mean, you hear people talking about digitization. You hear people talking about digitalization. But coming from where I come from, that is a strategic understanding that, are we talking about the resilience? Are people aware how you protect yourself, your data, as well as contribute to the overall national security by not becoming a vulnerability? I'll give you an example. Many years back when I was teaching in the US, I had to do this talk to a very rural farming community in the US on cybersecurity. So this is what 10, 12 years back. So most of them were farming folks. Some of them actually came from the field, so they were in the. So we did this. So I talked about the contemporary cybersecurity, and at the back end of the hall, a lone farmer said, "Professor," he shouted very, said, "Professor, this is where we live. It's one of the harshest. We have the harshest winters. We get power outages all the time, right? The internet goes out most of the sometimes during winter storm, ice storms and all. So you're telling me, but it's something different, cybersecurity, Then it was a very tough question, and he was, I think, a very, very senior gentleman. Then I told him, sir, when you lose your internet or power, it's the ice storm. How would you feel if a foreign entity or a terrorist has caused that? Then he stopped and said, So that's the difference. So digitization and digitalization, and when you are moving into the digital ecosystem, the strategic vulnerability is not a power outage, it's not that, but that is the security strategic approach. So more and more now, states are compelled not just to protect infrastructure, but also people, because it's one of the biggest problems globally is that people's data is being taken away. If you look at some of the biggest hacks, it's not sensitive government information nor weapons programs as we think. That also has happened. There have been certain kind of vulnerabilities and breaches of that, but mostly it's people's data.
Now, Dr. Harinda, we are talking about technology and the rapidity of technological advancement, and technology is rapidly changing the way that we live and work. Whatever industry we are in, you spoke about farmers, it could be it could be the health sector, it could be shipping, whatever, but technology is changing it. Whatever you are doing now, you will be doing differently in a year or two. Now, but we need to change to cope with this. And to do that, we need to know what the future is going to look like. Now, recently, Elon Musk, who is, like him or not, he's a very far-thinking individual, and he had given some interviews, and when that popped up on my social media, I took the time to watch that. It was about an hour long, but I made the time because I wanted to know what his vision of the future is, because it's both challenges and opportunities. Now, I wonder whether our policymakers take that time to look at what the future might be according to these very, futuristic people. Do we do that?
Frankly, I don't know if policymakers are that future-oriented, even globally, how many of them are future-oriented. Good you asked that question. Recently, there was this study of main political leaders' speeches. This is this is the dead opposite of what you're asking me. It's just not just in Sri Lanka. And there was about 5-10 years back, a lot of leaders spoke about future. Right? And they found out recently that it's missing in the current discourse.
So you mean political leaders are no longer speaking as much about the future?
Yeah. You know why? It's a very interesting thing, because one major issue is, I think, globally, contemporary crises are exacerbating. So
they're busy firefighting those.
Whether you're in the most developing part of the world to the lesser developed world, the crisis upon crisis. Last week, Spain had to deal with 60,000 migrants trying to inundate Quetta in 24 hours. So now there is an argument, are we seeing for the first time weaponization of migration? Can someone utilize human populations to overwhelm country sovereignties? Which is something you'd have to utter in the 5th century or 6th century, but now that's happening. So most of the European countries are battling forest fires or wildfires. There is a climate crisis, right? The other countries are battling political instability. I would have not thought, many would have anticipated the cockroach movement to go into that level of a high gear. So in India. So what you're saying, and even in the US, there is significant internal crises, there is significant problems in the economy, in the incomes of the middle class and the low middle class. So the world is brim with crisis.
So what you're saying is there may not be as much thought given to the future.
No, but my worry is policymakers are distracted by the crisis, but the techno-capitalism is rampant. So few organizations, including the gentleman you spoke about, they have been able to create solutions that an average person can understand, as well as the policymakers seem to not have a grasp. So we are creating this major disjuncture globally between that technological capability and the capacity of governance. So that's queuing will be significantly, there are opportunities, but it will be challenge to the world. As well as, if you look at a country like Sri Lanka, how are we going to deal with situations like that? Right. So that's something we have to be at least conscious of. We really need strategic thought, populated at least among people who make decisions, state sector, public sector, private sector, civil society. If not, I think we are either in a way of out of time in many ways. If you, I don't know if you got this picture I'm trying to show you. When the Americans bombed Iran, right, they hit 1,300 targets That is purely because of the AI-driven capabilities. But they also made a big blunder when they bombed, when a cruise missile struck a girls' school, right, killing about 200 young girls. Why? Basically because the AI was doing the target selection, and this AI was not properly updated. So they hit actual military barracks, which was a school which was a military barrack. Then later, was a civilian establishment, but the AI was not updated. So when you start using solutions like this, these companies are providing, now you have operating systems of war. So there are certain companies, I don't want to name them, on they are seen as the new, they are providing the information technological backbone to states to go to war. So I mean, in that scale, what kind of thinking are we promoting? What kind of are we kind of advancing? So I think it's high time Sri Lanka's system, education, knowledge systems accommodate this kind of analysis, reading of situations, even at a lower level, from corporate sector to how institutions are done, future of work allocation. So there is a huge tendency. There's a big battle in universities about use of AI for students, right? And we are trying to evolve AI policies. But the moment we try to, the time we take to evolve AI policy, AI has moved on. So I think we had to look at it in a different way. Sometimes we are trying to address 21st century problems from a 20th century mindset. That has to change.
So again, for mindsets to change, you have to recognize that there is a problem in the process. And you mentioned the national security strategy, which of course is not, it's only a small part of it is about defense. It has to do with transportation, health, shipping, exports, imports, you name it, energy, everything. There has to be a strategy for that. But unfortunately, our strategies are just willy-nilly, aren't they?
Yeah, I think we seriously lack a national security strategy, because the national security strategy, the moment you talk about national security strategy, people feel that it's like more, it's like a securitization, militarization debate. No, it's not. It is about creating that overarching framework where things, so for example, why do we not have a robust energy security strategy? Because energy security is one major pillar of a national security approach. So, if you can't fulfill energy security, you can't basically...
Everything else falls.
No, for example, I hear people saying we can establish, we have to promote AI and all this. But people don't understand. To do all of that thing, you need, if a single data center, if you establish in Sri Lanka, the amount of water and energy it needs to function. So if you don't have a energy system that is resilient, robust, and is not going to fail every time, you're not going to advance in any of these fields. Basically, even if you get, because if you are bringing in system, because the world is moving towards what we call electrification. So some people argue China has mastered the art of becoming an electro state. And that is why it's leading all the petro states like the United States. The 20th century was about petro, resilience as well as petro self-sufficiency. 21st century is about electricity sufficiency, because electricity is the energy that drives the AI, that drives the computational capability. If you want digitization and digitalization, that's what it is driving. Sri Lanka, look at that, we are talking in the financial sector about digitization, but we are still an ATM handed cash driven society.
Absolutely. I mean, if you go to any of our local banks, any day of the week, especially on Monday, there's a huge queue.
I think
state banks, private banks, all of them.
If you look at the amount of money you need to maintain money for a year, if you take it from a GDP percentage, as far as I know, it's even higher than the GDP percentage we have allocated for education. Because if you're a cash society, you have to look after the cash. Cash always, so you need to replenish, you need to do the machines. And we still want an ATM in a bank. So that is a mindset, you know. So that's how our countries have advanced beyond.
Are we still stuck in the latter half of the 20th century?
I think still, you know, one of the problems in this country is one of the things that we have to promote. We have to have a large imagination. We have to have a national vision of the idea of Sri Lanka, where we should be. It's funny, you know, we talk about national security, we talk about maritime strategy. A lot of foreign experts tells me, you're a maritime nation. I tell them, you guys see us as a maritime nation. You go to Sri Lanka inward, you go 50 miles inward anywhere in Sri Lanka and ask them, are you maritime? They'll say, what nonsense, we are not maritime. Right?
We are agricultural.
Yeah, we are agricultural. We would have, been, hydraulic civilization if we go back. So we don't see ourselves like that. So our strengths in a historic way has become our actual Achilles heel also. So so I think the importance of this conversation is we have to make people first at least start thinking why we are stuck.
Now, it's not just about crises and challenges.
No.
Now, you mentioned the fact that we are a maritime nation. That is actually a plus point. But if we don't recognize that strength, then we are unable to use it as it should be.
Yeah, Sri Lanka's strength, if you look at from history, antique, whatever, where at any point of it has been that we were a trading nation. We were, if we don't trade, we were a hub for trading, right? So we have to work on that. We have to have so how many of our students, how is there a syllabus in the A-level syllabus? Do we have international trade as a component? Do we know the value of the international trade? This is not entrepreneurship, but international trade. How we connect ports, right? So, and are we encouraging trade in this country? We want to sell, but imagine, if I don't know this has been taken up. If you are an EU citizen in this country who wants to set up a small cafe, that person has to go through the worst hardship to set it up, and every year has to go through a massive process to keep that business going in this country. So, if we are to be a properly globally connected, globalized, society, like we all want to go to the US, go to EU, we should also provide that space, because there is a huge. See, if we change certain approaches to investment in this country, there will be a lot of investors coming to Sri Lanka, but that environment is not there. I'm not an investment or trade expert, but I'm trying to tell you is the point is from a strategic approach, what I know is that the strength we have had. One of the things is the fact that we always say we are strategically located, but that strategic location is also in currency. It is about it's a hub. We are a hub. It's not about producing everything here. It's not about It's about us using that positionality, which we have used from antiquity. That is why Roman traders have come here. We have a history of trading. If you look at Trincomalee, so the islands, that was all where all the trading, that was a trading post. So many ships came there. If you look at the setup of Colombo Harbour, people don't know, is an engineering marvel done by the Brits, right? And if you look at the early 20th century figures of ships coming in out of Colombo Harbour, so that was astronomical. We were called the Clapham Junction of the Indian Ocean. So it's not that we have not been there, right? I think it's about discovering our strengths and fit, applying that, because if not, I seriously feel that we are running out of time.
So we need more strategic thinking, and we need that to fit into a national vision.
Yeah, we need more applied strategic thinking, which we then links to policy. When I say strategic thinking, it's not from one discipline. You can be a doctor, you can be an educator, you can be a construction engineer, but the only thing is you need to understand strategically how that your specialty, your strength, your business can contribute, and then the same capacity of the state to absorb that.
Absolutely. So a lot of interesting points indeed, and I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to Dr. Harinda Vidanage, Director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the Kotalawala Defence University, KDU. Thank you very much for having joined me.
Thank you, Mr. Ediyathambie, for inviting me, and that was a great conversation. Thank you.
And thank you to you at home for watching. And don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.
TV1. TV for life.
Public Security Minister calls SLPP statement on IGP assassination plot serious. Police investigation launched into statement. Bar Association of Sri Lanka sends strong letter to Sajith over unapproved MP briefing plan. Former